Hello to my online learners. Hopefully this is working okay because I'm on a shared internet line, so there could be some concerns there. I'll give it a shot. If not, I will re-record it later. Chapter 6, which is the skeletal system. So that's the topic for today. When we look at the skeletal system, or the skeleton, all the bones, you will see that there are a lot of them. You have 206 bones in your body. You don't need to memorize them all. At this point, you just need to be aware of the ones that are on this page. And even this is pretty detailed. Go through the main bones and not necessarily the process. So here you can see the manubrium and the xiphoid is a process on the sternum. Anyway, anything on this page could be game for testing. When we look at the skeletal system, it's got a lot of functions, 6 functions according to this one, and you may not have thought of them all. First one is support, it holds you up. Second one is protection, so your ribs protect your inside organs, your cranium protects your brain. Then there's movement, because your bones act as the levers for your muscles to work on. Something you may not have thought of is mineral storage, because you've got your calcium and your phosphorus in your in your bones. Then the storage of blood producing cells, that is in your red bone marrow, is where your cells are that create your blood. And we'll talk a little bit more about how they're made when we get into blood. Then there's also the storage of energy. Did you know that you have yellow fat inside your bone marrow? So bones are made up of non-living things such as calcium and phosphorus, but they're very much alive in the fact that they have a collagen in them and a very good blood supply. This goes into a little more detail than you need to know, but you need to realize that bones are constantly rebuilding and repairing themselves. So that's why breaking a bone really isn't that big a deal. Now you have 2 types of bone. Compact bone, which is hard and dense, and that's the shaft, and it is strong, and it's made up of things called osteons. Then you have spongy bones, which are arranged in tuberculi. You don't need to know that term, but realize it's spongy in appearance. So when you look here on your outside, you've got your compact bone for strength, and then you've got your spongy bone inside, and the spongy bone is where your blood cells are made. Now, there's a lot of terms here. I want you, for this big one, just kind of get an idea of what it looks like. For this one, you need to know that diaphysis is the middle, epiphysis is the end. Then here's the epiphyseal plate, which we'll talk about later when we talk about bone growth, because you grow at this epiphyseal plate. And then once you get older, this just turns into an epiphyseal line. Inside your bone has really good blood supply, which runs up and down. Which runs up and down. And then you have what's called your medullary cavity there. Have a good look at this. Periosteum. Peri means around. So the periosteum is the covering around that is very good because it's tough. It will hold things to the bone, but it also has a very good blood supply in it. Then there was discussion about the yellow bone marrow. The yellow bone marrow is where fat is stored. When you look at the bones, the bone cells are made up of what are called osteons, and osteons are these tunnel-like things. It kind of looks like a tree trunk, but realize as a tree has one trunk, the bone has many different canals going up and down. A lot of terminology here. You just need to know that osteon is the bone cell. And you don't need to know tuberculae or the canals that go back and forth because they all have names. Just realize there are a lot of canals, and so bone really isn't solid. Good. Now, when you look at bones, they're classified based on shape, and I just want you to be aware that they're classified based on shape. You don't need to go into detail on this, so you can have a look at it if you wish. And then when you look at bone structure, you've got the diaphysis and the epiphysis. The dia means through, like diarrhea goes through you, so that's the part that goes through the middle of the bone. Epi means on top, so that's at the end of bones. Then to help with your bones, you've got articulating cartilage on each end, which helps reduce friction. Your periosteum is the tough fibrous cover on the outside, and this contains your blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerves, so it's very important. Inside your medullary cavity is where bone marrow is, and then you have the endosteum, which is inside. So oste is a bone word, so hopefully you figured that out. And here's a diagram. Just kind of generally know this. There's all sorts of bumps and grooves and projections on your bones. I just want you to realize they're there. We're not going to get into too much detail. Osteoporosis is when your bones start to disappear, and this is because when you're older, the osteoclasts, which are the cells that build down, are more active than the osteoblasts, which are the cells that build. So blasts build, clasts break down. Now, when you look at the skeleton, there's basically the axial skeleton, which is your skull and vertebrae, and then you have your appendicular, which is all the rest. Now, your textbook goes into a lot of different details. I want you to be aware that the skull is made up of many bones, but you don't need to know all these bones at this level. Just like the rib cage, you've got all these different ribs. You have true ribs, which actually join with the sternum. You have false ribs, which join with cartilage, and then you have these floating ribs at the back. Your spinal column, please realize that you have different structures. You've got your cervical, which is 7 of the first ones in your neck, your thoracic, which are 12, and these are the ones that the rib cage is reported to, your lumbar, which is your lower back, and then you have your sacral, which in your coccyx, which are the ones in your hip bone. Okay? Don't worry about the different abnormal curvatures. Just realize that there are abnormal curvatures, and one that's not mentioned on here is text neck, and that's where we lose the first curve in our neck because we're all down on our things like this. So stretch your neck to prevent text neck. Okay, scoliosis is just a word for it. Herniated disc is another thing. Your appendicular skeleton is your girdles, your shoulder girdle, your hip girdle, and your appendixes. This shows the difference between a female pelvis and a male pelvis. Basically, the female pelvis has a wider opening. It's a little thicker. That's why women usually have bigger hips than men, and that's so they can birth a baby and hold a baby. So the pelvic angle is more open, and it is usually larger. Just a little FYI. There's a lot of information on bone fractures here. I want you to be aware of them, and that basically the fractures, any break in the bone, and they're classified based on whether they puncture the skin and the type of fracture they are. We're not going to go into this detail because it's too much at this time, and you'll get it more in your patho course. When it comes to your bones, you have articulation. So you have joints. Joints are where your bones bend. And some are held together with cartilage. Some are very fibrous, and some have great movability. So you have a movable joint, or your movable joints are your synovial joints. Just a second here. Your synovial joint has all these parts to them. Don't worry about the detail, just realize that they're quite complicated. So your synovial joint has fluid in it called synovial joint fluid. You have your capsule, you have ligaments holding bone to bone, and you have all sorts of cartilage to help keep it together. Just be aware of the complexity. I won't quiz you on the complexity. So when it comes to the complexity of this joint, you have cartilage, which is the connective tissue, usually on the ends for cushioning, and then you have ligaments, and ligaments will hold the joint together, and ligaments are tough, and they hold bone to bone, and they're dense connective tissue, if you remember back to dense connective tissue. Now, there are 6 types of joints, and if you look at them, we'll do a little dance and we'll show you them. So first thing you look at, Ooh, that's pretty greeny. I think I've just frozen. Let's not do that then. Okay. But when you look at the joints, I lost it completely.